Hello, the following video is a brief outline of Chapter 9 from the book Substance Use and Abuse, Sociological Perspectives by Victor Shaw. Chapter 9 deals with the social reaction perspective, otherwise known as labeling theory. And labeling theory focuses on the interactive nature between the three-way relationship among substance users, substance use, and societal responses. An analogy to help us understand social reaction perspective can be a theater play in which the actor or the substance user can choose to avoid, lessen, or escalate his act or the substance use based on the reactions of its audience. Labeling theory attempts to explain how we shape and in turn are shaped by others in a cyclical sequence. Some of its sources of inspiration are Charles Horton Cooley, who coined the looking glass self concept, and he observed that our self-identity and self-evaluation is basically a reflection of what we believe to be other people's reaction to our conduct. W.I. Thomas, in his thought-provoking theory on the definition of the situation, proposed that when people define a situation as real, it becomes real in its consequence. Robert Merton developed the concept of a self-fulfilling prophecy, which says that when a social group defines a person or event in certain ways, they may in turn shape future activities and circumstances by giving way to their anticipated behaviors. Frank Tannenbaum discovered that there is a gradual shift from defining a specific act as evil to defining the individual as evil. He suggested that societal treatment turns occasional criminals into hardened criminals and stated that the real evil lies in the societal treatment, not the act itself. Edwin Lamert concerned himself with labeling as a critical determinant in subsequent deviant or conforming behavior. He came up with primary and secondary deviation. Primary deviation occurs when the individual commits one or two deviant acts but does not internalize deviant self-concept. Secondary deviation occurs when the individual assumes the deviant role imputed on him through societal reactions and behaves in accordance of such. For example, a juvenile is formally labeled by the court system, comes home to be treated as a troublemaker, and behaves in according to such label. Howard Becker introduced the notion that there is a developmental process from attainment of a deviant identity to devoted participation in a deviant career. Pelevian and Breyer noted that many dispositions made by police officers in cases of suspected juvenile offenders are often based on the public face he has presented to officials, rather than the kind of offense he has committed. Aaron Sickerell noted that authority agencies not only negatively label juveniles, but may predispose them to future litigation through ad hoc interpretations of character, family life, and future possibilities of crime. Edwin Scher documented overuse of stigmatizing labels in the justice system and insisted that there is nothing internally or externally different between delinquents and non-delinquents, other than the fact that delinquents are processed through the justice system. Hugh Barlow distinguished between acts of mala in se, or inherently evil acts, and mala prohibit, evil acts only because they're prohibited. David Ward and Charles Tittle found that sanctioning and labeling norm violators affects the likelihood of the offender developing deviant identity and significantly affects the likelihood of recidivism, or his likelihood of going back into the justice system. The theoretical framework of social reaction perspective is that substance use is a social act symbolizing general morale and sentiment in a society because he makes his choices in interaction with other social members and his individual behaviors are shaped by larger social forces. The definition of this is that before an individual makes a choice, he must go through a sequence of process-embedded propositions. 1. Society puts different values to different acts and deeds by individuals. 2. Individual enhance Their status by pursuing different things ranked for different social significance. Substance use is used in the way it is socially defined. Number 4, after using a substance, people become users when they are confirmed by social reactions. 5, users stay with a substance after being labeled by their continual interest in it. 6, when treated by different social agents for the chronic problems with a substance, addicts wrestle with a substance and become troublemakers. There are 4 important conceptual milestones to this definition, and that is the status or the prestige position one has in relation to others, labeling, which is the process of communicating and recording status with indicative words, perception, or the effects that the status is felt, understood, and accepted by one and one's group through the process of labeling. Subsequent behavior are the acts following the self-perceived internalization of specific status, labeling, and labels. The theoretical image is that everything changes because of various forces around its origin, nature, social reaction, self-perception, and status. Nothing remains what it originally is. Substances are defined by cultural, social, and historical forces to a large extent. Narcotics, for example, are defined differently from incident to incident. In the case of the patient, the substance is used for pain relief. In the case of the intravenous user, it is used for pleasure. There's a long evolving process recognized for labeling. The user is identified to bear labels. These labels modify self-evaluation. Self-evaluation is internalized. Use is intensified, stabilized, or perpetuated to qualify for a specific substance use status. Groups may promote some substances, but not others. Theoretical components. Social reaction perspectives study how social factors shape and reshape attitudes and behaviors by individuals. Labeling is the attribution of an identifying label to an act or actor. It represents both beginning and end of social individual interaction process. The individual is placed in a specific mental and behavioral framework in which he perceives himself, fashions his social participation in accordance with social expectation transmitted from the label. The individual is judged by his initial actions and deeds. First, hierarchy, our sequence of labels. Second, labeling can be made not only by other members of society, but by the individual himself. Self-labeling may provide more powerful sources of influence for identity acquisition, confirmation, and modification. Third, labeling may be carried on by a family from parents to children, creating a genealogical tradition used for one, two, or several substances. Fourth, labeling may be transmitted from one to another among peers, making some labels property shared by a closely knit peer group. Peer group spillover occurs when members of a group become identified with a label earned by the group or group leaders and act accordingly to qualify for the label themselves. Delabeling is when users give up use, clearing the user's label from themselves. Society takes off labels in a formal manner after careful evaluation of long enough abstinence or recovery from use. Relabeling is completed when new role and new identity in the world is assumed. Relabeling is the simple restoration of a previously possessed or experienced fame or status. The underlying labeling, delabeling, and relabeling are three important variables. This means that there are three important variables underlying labeling, delabeling, and relabeling. These are perception, or the mental process that reflects upon labeling, translates it into human feelings, manifests changes in self-identity, and governs behaviors subsequent to labeling and identity change. Primary substance use is the initial act that leads to social reaction or triggers formal labeling. When the whole deviant career or labeling experience of a person are taken into account, primary substance use may in fact be a secondary deviation or act resulting from a formal labeling process. Secondary substance use is the progressive or regressive consequence that results from labeling and change in self-identity. Secondary substance use follows a formal labeling process in which users are recognized as specific types or classes of users, and they begin to perceive and behave themselves in their use and non-use environments. Classical labeling theory focuses only on self-perception, studying how one sees himself when he sees the difference in the way he is viewed by others. Also studies how self-perception prompts change in self-identity. Third-party perception refers to views and feelings towards a label and a sole labeled person by his family members, relatives, friends, peers, co-workers, and neighbors. Collective perception is shared by people in a group, organization, community, culture, or society about a label and a subject or object so labeled. Collective perception remains the only medium where the label assumes meaning and labeling takes effect. Primary substance use takes place before use is identified and the user is labeled. Some of the theoretical applications for social reaction perspective can be: the central question raised is what role and how significantly does social reaction play in the imitation, escalation, habituation, or termination of an individual's substance use. The empirical tests that can help us study social reaction perspective are case studies, which are appropriate for both users and substances. The value of a case in a case study may lie in its uniqueness, typicality, or the fact that it can be studied in great detail. A historical analysis can tell us how individuals are first labeled and how the labeling in one area leads to labeling in another. Interview and survey research is suitable for study of the labelers intending in creating and assigning a label for substance, use, or user, and can tell us how people generally act or react to the label and how labels interpret the label. Only interviews can find out whether labeling acts upon the subject positively, negatively, or neutrally. Experimental studies are useful in comparing effects of labels and labeling for substances, substance use, and users. A self-reflective approach on social reaction itself, social reactions, while purporting to reduce, halt, or eliminate substance use, may actually play an important part in making it a continuing, expanding, or exacerbating social problem. How does this apply to social policy? Well, in public health, prevention begins with a clear identification of risk behaviors and risk-taking individuals. Medical prevention may also harden its target and make itself a continuing pursuit for its own sakes. Social control. Agents and agencies in social control, although charged with a high level of moral input, usually do not reserve much time to reflect upon what consequences their actions bring about in the minds of their targeted subjects. For our life and community, the community serves as a critical medium through which a label is transmitted. In a work or organization, we may directly or indirectly influence how substance use is initiated, why labeling takes place, and whether relabeling from substance use is successful. Work can be a potential source of stress, and an organization may provide an authoritative context where labels are created, ascertained, assigned, interpreted, and made effective by and unto individuals. Work may serve as a reward toward recovery, while organizations may offer collective support for quitting substance users. Thank you for watching.